in the middle of a dinner celebrating 3 years together at the most exclusive restaurant in Chicago. A Mafia boss received a warning from the most unexpected source, a 6-year-old girl, the daughter of a waitress. "Mister, that lady put something in your cake." With survival instincts sharpened over 2 decades in the underworld, he quietly switched the plates. When Serena returned from the restroom, tragedy began, but not the way she had planned. The Chicago skyline glittered like scattered diamonds against the night sky as Dominic Vittorio adjusted his cufflinks. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Monarch, perched on the penthouse level of a 60-story tower, he could see Lake Michigan stretching endlessly into the darkness. The water reflected the city lights like a mirror holding secrets, much like the man who sat watching it. At 37, Dominic embodied power in its most dangerous form. His custom-tailored black suit hugged his broad shoulders with precision, a faint scar traced along his left jaw, a souvenir from the territorial war 10 years ago, the night he had proven to everyone in Chicago that the Vittorio name was not to be challenged. Most men who had given him that scar were now buried in unmarked graves. Dominic had kept the scar as a reminder. Trust no one. Survive everything. He sat at his usual table, the VIP corner booth, strategically positioned with his back against the wall and his eyes facing the entrance. Old habits from the streets never died. His bodyguard stood exactly 10 meters away, close enough to intervene, far enough to grant the illusion of privacy. Tonight, the Monarch had been transformed according to Serena's specifications. Candlelight flickered across white tablecloths. Expensive red wine breathed in crystal decanters. White roses, dozens of them, adorned the table in elegant arrangements. Everything she had requested. Everything money could buy. Dominic's fingers traced the stem of his wineglass as he surveyed the room. With a single nod, the entire restaurant would serve him exclusively. Waiters moved around his table like planets orbiting the sun, respectful, distant, terrified. The manager had personally greeted him 3 times already, each bow deeper than the last. This was his kingdom. The east side of Chicago bent to his will. Politicians called him for favors. Police captains looked the other way. Business owners paid their tributes without complaint. He had built an empire from nothing, from the blood-soaked streets where his mother had died, from the foster homes that had tried to break him, from the prison cell where he had learned that mercy was weakness. Yet as he sat in this temple of luxury, surrounded by people who feared him, Dominic Vittorio felt the familiar hollow ache that no amount of power could fill. He had everything money could buy, except one thing, someone who truly stood by his side. Not for the money, not for the protection, not for the fear, just for him. The thought flickered through his mind like a match in the wind there for a moment, then gone. He had learned long ago to bury such weaknesses. In his world, sentiment was a bullet waiting to be fired. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and Dominic's attention shifted. Serena had arrived. Serena Castellano entered the dining room with the practiced grace of a woman who knew exactly how to command attention. Her crimson dress clung to every curve, the fabric catching the candlelight as she moved. Her lips were painted the same shade of red, bold, deliberate, dangerous. Around her neck hung the diamond necklace Dominic had given her last Christmas, and matching earrings sparkled beneath her sleek black hair. She was stunning. She had always been stunning, but tonight, something about her beauty felt rehearsed, too perfect, too precise, like a performance she had practiced in front of a mirror. "Darling." Serena leaned down to press a kiss against his cheek, leaving behind the faint trace of her perfume. "You've outdone yourself. This is absolutely magnificent." Dominic rose slightly from his seat, a gesture of courtesy he extended to few. "Only the best for us." She settled into the chair across from him, her movements fluid and elegant. Her smile stretched wide, showing perfect white teeth. But as she reached for her napkin, her eyes flickered briefly to her watch. A small detail, barely noticeable. Dominic noticed. 3 years, Serena said, raising her wineglass. "Can you believe it? 3 wonderful years." Their glasses clinked, the crystal producing a sound that seemed to hang in the air. Dominic took a measured sip while Serena drank deeply, her throat moving with each swallow. "I still remember the night we met," she continued, her voice sweet as honey. "That charity gala. You were standing alone by the window, looking so serious." She laughed, a bright, tinkling sound that carried across the restaurant. "I told myself, that man needs someone to make him smile." Her hand reached across the table to touch his. Once, twice, 3 times in the span of a minute. Her fingers lingered on his knuckles, stroking gently. Too much. She was touching him too much. Dominic's instincts stirred that familiar whisper at the back of his skull that had kept him alive through ambushes, betrayals, and assassination attempts. Something was wrong. Something was off. "What are your plans next week?" he asked casually, watching her face. Serena's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. Her eyes darted away before returning to meet his gaze. "Oh, the usual," she replied, her voice a beat too late. "Shopping. Lunch with friends. Maybe a spa day." She laughed again, too loud this time, and checked her phone beneath the table. Her thumb moved quickly across the screen before she slipped it back into her clutch. Dominic filed away each observation in his mind. The nervous glances, the excessive affection, the hesitation in her answers. 20 years in the underworld had taught him to read people like books. And right now, Serena's pages were filled with contradictions, but he pushed the suspicion aside. Perhaps she wanted a more expensive gift this year. Perhaps she was planning a surprise. Perhaps he was simply too paranoid, too damaged by years of violence to recognize genuine love when it sat across from him. The appetizers arrived, carried by a waitress Dominic had not seen before. She was young, late 20s, perhaps with blonde hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her uniform was slightly too large, hanging off her thin frame. As she placed the plates on the table, her hands trembled almost imperceptibly. Dominic's eyes caught the faded bruise on her wrist, the dark circles beneath her tired eyes. The way she moved, cautious, apologetic, as if trying to occupy as little space as possible. A flicker of something crossed his chest. Not quite sympathy, not quite recognition. Just a brief acknowledgement of suffering he understood all too well. Then it was gone, buried beneath layers of calculated indifference. The waitress finished pouring wine with shaking hands. She murmured a quiet apology and retreated toward the kitchen. Dominic watched her disappear. He did not know her name. He did not know that her daughter sat in the back room with a coloring book. He did not know that in less than an hour, that same daughter would save his life. For now, he simply turned back to Serena and raised his glass. "To 3 years," he said. Serena smiled. "To many more." In the cramped staff room behind the Monarch's gleaming kitchen, a 6-year-old girl sat perfectly still on a plastic chair. Her legs dangled above the floor, too short to reach. In her lap rested a worn coloring book, its pages filled with half-finished princesses and crooked rainbows. Beside her sat a threadbare teddy bear with one button eye, missing her only companion for the evening. Emma Sullivan had learned early that being invisible was a survival skill. Her mother had been clear before leaving her here. "Stay quiet, baby. Don't move from this spot. Don't bother anyone. Mommy will come check on you when I can." So Emma stayed. She colored inside the lines mostly and hugged Mr. Buttons close whenever someone walked past the open door. The kitchen was loud and scary. Pots clanged. Chefs shouted. The air smelled like things she could not name. She missed their tiny apartment. She missed her bed with the faded princess sheets. But the babysitter had called Mommy just 2 hours ago, saying she could not come tonight. Emma had watched her mother's face crumble just for a second before rebuilding itself into that tired smile she always wore. "It's okay," Mommy had said into the phone. "I'll figure something out." But there was nothing to figure out. Mommy had already missed 2 days this month. One more absence meant no job. No job meant no food. No food meant the kind of hungry that made Emma's stomach hurt at night. So here she sat, being a good girl, being invisible, being quiet, until she needed the bathroom. Emma waited as long as she could. She squeezed her legs together and tried to focus on her coloring, but the pressure grew unbearable, and Mommy had been gone for so long, and she really, really had to go. She slipped off the chair, clutching Mr. Buttons against her chest. The hallway outside the staff room split in 2 directions. Mommy had pointed toward the right before leaving, but everything looked the same. White walls, gray doors, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Emma turned left. The corridor twisted deeper into the building, past storage rooms and a humming refrigerator unit. Emma's heart beat faster with each step. She should go back. She should wait. But the pressure in her bladder screamed urgency. Then she heard voices. A woman's voice sharp, commanding, familiar somehow, and a man's voice nervous, uncertain. Emma froze beside a tall metal shelf stacked with supplies. Through the gap between boxes, she could see 2 figures standing near the back entrance of the kitchen. One was a man in white chef's clothes. The other was a woman in a red dress, the lady from outside, the pretty one with the dark hair who had kissed the man at the fancy table. Emma shrank smaller, pressing herself against the cold shelf. "Put this in the dessert for the VIP table," the woman said, her voice low and precise. She pressed a thick envelope into the chef's hands. The man in the black suit. "Make sure no one sees." The chef hesitated. "What is it?" "You don't need to know what it is. You just need to do your job." She handed him something else, a small, brown bottle that caught the light briefly before disappearing into his pocket. Emma stopped breathing. She did not understand everything. She was only 6, but she understood secrets. She understood the way Mommy's voice changed when something was wrong. She understood the heavy feeling in her chest that meant danger. Something bad was about to happen. The woman in red turned, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. For one terrible moment, Emma thought those cold eyes would find her hiding spot. But the woman walked past without looking, disappearing through a door that led back toward the restaurant. The chef stood alone for a moment, staring at the envelope in his hands. Then he too vanished into the kitchen. Emma remained frozen, her small body trembling. The man in the black suit, the VIP table. She had seen him earlier through the kitchen door, sitting alone, watching everyone with eyes that reminded her of a lion at the zoo. If that man dies, she thought suddenly, will Mommy lose her job? The thought propelled her forward before fear could stop her. She had to tell someone. She had to tell him. Emma crept through the service corridor, her small fingers clutching Mr. Buttons so tightly his worn fabric threatened to tear. Her heart pounded against her ribs like a trapped bird. Every instinct screamed at her to run back to the staff room, to hide, to pretend she had seen nothing. But Mommy's voice echoed in her mind, the words she repeated every night before bed. Always tell the truth, baby. Even when you're scared. Especially when you're scared. Emma reached the edge of the dining room and peered around the corner. The restaurant stretched before her like a scene from a fairy tale, soft golden light. White flowers everywhere. People in beautiful clothes eating from plates that sparkled. It was the fanciest place she had ever seen. And there he was. The man in the black suit sat alone at his corner table, gazing out the massive windows at the dark water beyond. The woman in the red dress was gone. Emma had watched her walk toward the bathrooms just moments ago. This was her chance. Maybe her only chance. The bodyguard stood nearby, tall and terrifying, with arms as thick as tree trunks. Emma's legs trembled. She could not do this. She was too small, too scared. What if they yelled at her? What if they grabbed her? What if Mommy got fired because of her? But then she remembered the brown bottle, the envelope full of money, the woman's cold voice saying words that meant something terrible. Emma took a deep breath and stepped into the dining room. She moved between tables like a ghost, keeping her head down, avoiding eye contact with the elegant guests who barely noticed her passing. Her worn sneakers made no sound on the polished floor. She was invisible, just like she had learned to be, until the bodyguard blocked her path. "Hey!" His voice was low and sharp. "What are you doing here? This area is restricted." Emma looked up at the giant man, her eyes filling with tears she could not stop. "Please," she whispered. "I need to talk to that man. Please. It's important." The bodyguard's expression did not change. "Kid, you need to leave. Now." But a voice cut through the tension. Deep, calm, commanding. "Let her through." The bodyguard turned, surprised. Behind him, Dominic Vittorio had risen slightly from his seat, his dark eyes fixed on the trembling child before him. Something in those eyes, something dangerous and calculating, assessed her with unsettling intensity. "Boss," I said, "let her through." The bodyguard stepped aside reluctantly. Emma felt the weight of 100 gazes pressing down on her as she approached the VIP table. Her legs moved on their own, carrying her forward until she stood before the most powerful man in Chicago. Up close, he was even more terrifying. His jaw was sharp and hard, marked by a faint scar. His eyes were the color of deep winter, cold, gray, unreadable. He looked at her the way she imagined wolves looked at rabbits. Emma swallowed hard. The words tumbled out in a rush, tripping over each other, desperate to escape before courage abandoned her completely. "Mister, the lady in the red dress put something in your cake. I saw her in the kitchen. She gave money to a cook and a little brown bottle and told him to put it in your dessert. The VIP table, the man in the black suit, that's you." Silence. Dominic's expression did not change. Not a flicker. Not a twitch. His face remained carved from stone, revealing nothing of the storm raging behind his eyes. Who sent this child? A rival testing him? A trap designed to make him paranoid? Or something else entirely? He studied her face, the tear-streaked cheeks, the trembling lips, the green eyes wide with pure, undiluted terror. There was no deception there. No rehearsed lines. No hidden agenda. Just a frightened little girl telling the truth. His survival instincts, the same instincts that had kept him alive through 2 decades of bloodshed, screamed 3 words. Believe her. Dominic nodded once. Thank you. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a crisp $100 bill. Gently, he placed it in Emma's small hand, curling her fingers around it. Go back to your mother, he said quietly. Don't tell anyone what you saw. Do you understand? Emma nodded frantically. And then she ran. She ran faster than she had ever run in her life, clutching the money and Mr. Buttons against her chest, weaving through tables until the service door swallowed her whole. Behind her, Dominic Vittorio sat very still. The dessert would arrive soon, and so would Serena. The dessert arrived precisely 3 minutes after Emma disappeared through the service door. 2 chocolate soufflés, identical in appearance, each adorned with delicate gold leaf and swirls of raspberry coulis. The waiter, not the tired blonde woman from before, but a young man with nervous hands, placed them on the table with ceremonial care. A small edible flower decorated the right plate. The left plate had none. "Your anniversary dessert, Mr. Vittorio." Compliments of the chef. Dominic nodded without looking at him. His eyes remained fixed on the plates. The right plate, the flower, his position, the little girl's words burned in his mind. The man in the black suit. The VIP table. "That's you." The waiter retreated. For a single, suspended moment, Dominic was alone with the 2 desserts and a decision that would determine whether he lived or died. He did not hesitate. In 3 seconds, while a nearby couple laughed at some private joke and a waiter crossed behind him carrying champagne, Dominic switched the plates. His movements were fluid, unhurried, invisible. The soufflé with the flower now sat before Serena's empty chair. The unmarked plate rested before him. His expression never changed. His heartbeat remained steady. Ice flowed through his veins where blood should have been. Now, he would wait. Serena returned moments later, gliding across the restaurant with that perfect smile still painted on her lips. She had refreshed her lipstick, adjusted her hair. Whatever message she had sent from the bathroom had been delivered. "Darling, the dessert looks absolutely divine." She settled into her chair, eyes brightening at the chocolate creation before her. "You know I can never resist their soufflé." "I remember," Dominic said quietly. Serena lifted her spoon and carved into the soft chocolate center. Steam rose from within, carrying the rich aroma across the table. She brought a generous portion to her lips, closing her eyes in theatrical pleasure. Perfect." Dominic raised his wineglass but did not drink. He watched her over the rim, every swallow, every breath, every micro-expression that flickered across her beautiful face. If the child lied, he thought, I will apologize. Send flowers. Blame paranoia. If she told the truth. 10 minutes passed. Serena continued eating, chattering about a charity gala next month, a designer dress she wanted, a vacation to the Maldives. Her voice was bright and animated, but Dominic noticed the first bead of sweat forming at her temple despite the restaurant's perfect climate control. 15 minutes. Her hand trembled almost imperceptibly as she reached for her water glass. The crystal clinked against her rings. She laughed too quickly and blamed the wine. I think I've had too much to drink, darling. Dominic said nothing. He simply watched. 20 minutes. The color drained from Serena's face like water from a broken vessel. Her cheeks, so carefully rouged, turned the shade of ash. Her breathing grew shallow and labored. Sweat now glistened openly on her forehead, ruining her flawless makeup. Dominic, her voice cracked. I don't feel well. She pressed a hand against her chest. Her pupils dilated. Panic crept into those dark eyes, genuine, uncontrollable panic. Something's wrong. I can't breathe properly. Dominic leaned forward slowly. The candlelight cast sharp shadows across his face, transforming his features into something predatory, something merciless. When he spoke, his voice was soft as silk and cold as the grave. Tell me, Serena, the thing you put in my dessert, what does it taste like? The words landed like bullets. Serena's eyes flew wide open. Horror flooded her expression, the raw, primal horror of a predator realizing she had become prey. Her mouth opened, lips moving, but no sound emerged. Her hand clutched at the tablecloth, pulling it toward her as her body swayed. You switched. She could not finish the sentence. Her eyes rolled backward. Her body convulsed, once a violent, terrible shudder, and then Serena Castellano collapsed forward onto the table. Crystal shattered. Wine spilled like blood across the white cloth. The white roses scattered, petals falling around her motionless form. Screams erupted throughout the restaurant, but Dominic Vittorio did not move. He sat perfectly still, watching the woman who had shared his bed for 3 years, who had kissed him and held him and whispered love into his ear, now lying unconscious in the ruins of their anniversary dinner, poisoned by her own treachery. His face betrayed nothing, but somewhere deep inside, in a place he had thought long dead, something cracked. Chaos erupted like wildfire through the monarch. Guests screamed and stumbled over chairs in their desperation to flee. Waiters dropped trays, sending crystal and porcelain shattering across the polished floor. A woman in pearls fainted into her husband's arms. The maitre d' stood frozen, mouth agape, utterly paralyzed by the catastrophe unfolding in his pristine establishment. Dominic rose from his chair. "Call an ambulance." His voice cut through the pandemonium like a blade, calm, controlled, absolute. "Lock the kitchen doors. No one leaves this building." The bodyguard moved instantly, barking orders into his radio. 2 more security personnel materialized from the shadows, positioning themselves at every exit. Within seconds, the chaos began to crystallize into terrified stillness. Dominic spoke once more, and this time, his voice carried the weight of an empire built on blood and fear. "Everyone stays where they are." The restaurant fell silent. Guests froze mid-step, waiters stopped running. Even the distant clatter from the kitchen ceased. They knew, perhaps instinctively, perhaps from whispered rumors, that the man standing before them was not someone to disobey. In the staff room behind the kitchen, Grace Sullivan heard the screams and felt her blood turn to ice. Emma. She abandoned her tray and ran, shoving past confused co-workers, her heart hammering against her ribs. The corridor stretched endlessly before her. Terrible images flashed through her mind, her daughter hurt, her daughter crying, her daughter lost in this nightmare she did not understand. She burst through the staff room door and found Emma huddled in the corner, clutching Mr. Buttons against her chest. Tears streamed down the little girl's face, but she was unharmed. She was safe. Grace dropped to her knees and pulled her daughter into her arms, holding her so tightly that Emma squeaked in protest. "Mommy, you're squishing me." "I'm sorry, baby. I'm sorry." Grace's voice cracked. "Are you okay? Did something happen? Did anyone hurt you?" Emma shook her head against her mother's shoulder. Then, in a whisper so quiet Grace almost missed it, "Mommy, did I do something bad?" Grace pulled back, searching her daughter's face. "What do you mean? What happened?" But before Emma could answer, a shadow fell across the doorway. Grace looked up to find a man in a dark suit watching them, not Dominic, but someone equally intimidating. His expression was unreadable. "Mrs. Sullivan, you need to come with me. Both of you." In the dining room, Dominic stood over Serena's unconscious body, while paramedics worked frantically to stabilize her. He had not touched her, had not held her hand, or whispered reassurances. He simply watched, his face carved from marble, as they loaded her onto a stretcher and wheeled her toward the service elevator. His phone was already pressed to his ear. "Marcus, get here now." 20 minutes later, Marcus Webb strode into the Monarch with the quiet confidence of a man who had seen worse. At 45, the former FBI agent carried himself with military precision, gray hair cropped short, eyes sharp as scalpels, every movement deliberate and economical. He had worked for Dominic for 15 years. He was the only person in the world Dominic trusted without reservation. "Talk to me," Marcus said, surveying the cordoned dining room. "Serena," Dominic's jaw tightened. "She tried to poison me. Someone warned me in time. I switched the plates." Marcus absorbed this information without visible reaction. "How do you know it was her? A witness? A child?" Dominic's eyes flickered toward the back of the restaurant. "Find out who's behind this. You have 1 hour." Marcus nodded and disappeared into the kitchen. The investigation moved with ruthless efficiency. Within 40 minutes, Marcus had assembled the critical pieces. The security cameras had been wiped, 30 minutes of footage erased, covering exactly the window when Serena had visited the kitchen. Someone had planned this carefully. The sous chef who had received the money was gone, vanished through the emergency exit behind the loading dock. His locker contained nothing but a burner phone and $3,000 in cash. But the most damning evidence waited in the kitchen trash. A small brown bottle, hastily discarded. The label was printed in Cyrillic script, Russian. Marcus brought it to Dominic, holding the bottle between gloved fingers. "Recognize the language?" Dominic stared at the foreign letters. His hands curled into fists at his sides. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Kozlov. The name tasted like ash and gunpowder on his tongue. Viktor Kozlov, the Russian boss who had been expanding into Chicago for years, pressing against Dominic's territory, testing boundaries, waiting for weakness. Now he had his answer. "He wants war," Dominic said quietly. "He'll get war." Marcus waited, knowing there was more. Dominic turned, his gray eyes scanning the restaurant until they found the service corridor. "But first find the child who warned me. The little girl. Blonde hair, green eyes. Her mother works here." "Why?" "Because Kozlov will find out someone tipped me off." Dominic's voice hardened. "And when he does, that child becomes a target." The restaurant manager stood before Dominic with sweat beading on his forehead, his hands trembling around a leather personnel folder. He had worked at the Monarch for 12 years. He had served celebrities, politicians, and criminals. But never had he felt terror quite like this. Grace Sullivan, he read aloud, his voice quivering, 28 years old, hired 2 years ago as a server. Excellent performance reviews, no complaints, never late. He swallowed hard. She's a widow, sir. Raises her daughter alone. The babysitter canceled tonight, and she couldn't afford to miss another shift. So she brought the child with her. The girl stayed in the staff room the whole evening, very quiet, never caused any trouble. Dominic listened without expression. His eyes remained fixed on some distant point beyond the manager's shoulder. Where are they now? The security team moved them to my office as instructed. The mother is quite distressed. Leave us. The manager fled without another word. Marcus fell into step beside Dominic as he walked toward the back of the restaurant. You want to explain what's happening here? We have a poisoning, a missing suspect, Russian involvement, and you're worried about a waitress and her kid? Dominic stopped walking. When he turned to face Marcus, something dangerous flickered in his gray eyes. That child saved my life tonight. A 6-year-old girl had more loyalty than the woman who shared my bed for 3 years. His voice dropped to a lethal whisper. Kozlov will investigate. He'll find out his plan failed. And when he does, he'll want to know who warned me. How long do you think it will take him to find her? Marcus was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. Protection detail? Full protection. Starting now. The manager's office was small and cluttered, overwhelmed by filing cabinets and stacks of paperwork. Grace sat in a worn leather chair, Emma curled in her lap. The little girl had stopped crying, but her face remained buried against her mother's chest, small fingers clutching the fabric of Grace's uniform. When the door opened, Grace looked up with the wild eyes of a cornered animal. Then Dominic stepped inside, and she stopped breathing. He filled the doorway like a shadow-given form. Power radiated from him, not the loud, boastful kind, but something quieter and far more dangerous. The air itself seemed to grow heavier in his presence. Grace's arms tightened around Emma. Instinctively, she shifted her body, placing herself between her daughter and the predator who had just entered the room. Dominic noticed. He noticed everything. The protective posture, the fierce determination in her exhausted eyes, the way Emma relaxed slightly against her mother's body, trusting completely, fearing nothing as long as she was held. Something stirred in his chest, a sensation so unfamiliar he almost did not recognize it. It felt like remembering a song he had forgotten, like glimpsing light through a crack in a sealed door. The last time he had witnessed such devotion, he had been 17 years old. His mother had stood between him and a man with a gun. She had died protecting him. 20 years, and the memory still burned. Dominic closed the door softly behind him. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than Grace expected, almost gentle. Your daughter saved my life tonight. Grace's face drained of color. She looked down at Emma, then back at Dominic. What? Emma, what did you do? The little girl lifted her tear-stained face from her mother's shoulder. I just told the truth, Mommy. Like you always said, the pretty lady put something bad in the man's cake. I saw her. I had to tell him. Grace pressed a hand over her mouth. Horror and pride and fear battled across her features. I don't understand, she whispered. What is happening? Who are you? Dominic did not answer the question directly. Instead, he crouched down slowly, deliberately, until his eyes were level with Emma's. The little girl flinched but did not look away. You were very brave, he said quietly. Most adults would not have done what you did. Emma sniffled. Are you mad at me? No. The word came out softer than Dominic intended. I'm grateful. He rose and faced Grace again. Her arms remained, wrapped around her daughter like armor. The people who tried to hurt me tonight will want to know who warned me. When they find out, your daughter will be in danger. Both of you will. Grace shook her head frantically. We don't have anything to do with whatever this is. We're nobody. I'm just a waitress. I know. Dominic's expression did not change, but something in his voice shifted, hardened with resolve. But you're involved now, whether you want to be or not. He stepped back toward the door. You'll stay under my protection until this is resolved. Both of you. My men will take you somewhere safe tonight. And if I refuse? Dominic paused with his hand on the doorknob. He looked back at her, at the fierce, frightened, exhausted woman who had nothing in the world except the child in her arms. Then I cannot guarantee your daughter will live through the week. The words hung in the air like smoke. Grace pulled Emma closer, her decision already made. The intensive care unit of Chicago Memorial Hospital hummed with the quiet rhythm of machines keeping Serena Castellano alive. She lay motionless in the narrow bed, tubes snaking from her arms and throat, monitors beeping in steady intervals. Her face, once so carefully sculpted with makeup and confidence, was now pale and slack, stripped of all pretense. The poison had ravaged her system. Doctors had pumped her stomach, administered antidotes, fought for hours to pull her back from the edge of death. She would survive, barely. 2 police officers stood guard outside her room. Both were on Dominic's payroll. The official report would read, severe food poisoning, an unfortunate allergic reaction. A tragic accident at an upscale restaurant. No investigation required, no questions asked. Dominic stood at the end of the hallway, watching through the glass partition as nurses checked Serena's vitals. His face betrayed nothing. He might have been observing a stranger. Marcus approached with a tablet in his hand, his expression grim. We cracked her phone. Dominic did not turn. And, it's worse than we thought. Marcus handed him the tablet. Encrypted messages. 6 months of conversations with a burner number, but our tech guy traced the signal origin. Kozlov. Dominic finally looked at the screen. The messages were displayed in chronological order, each one a knife waiting to be driven into his chest. 6 months ago. Serena, when do we move? Victor, patience. The right moment will come. 3 years is not long to wait for an empire. 4 months ago. Serena, he trusts me completely. He suspects nothing. Victor, good. Keep it that way. When he falls, you will be rewarded beyond imagination. 2 months ago. Serena, after he's dead, how will we divide the territory? Victor, you will have everything you desire. His properties, his accounts, his power. Trust me, darling. 1 week ago. Serena, the anniversary dinner. That's when I'll do it. Victor, perfect. Make sure it looks natural. Dominic scrolled through the messages slowly. Each word carved deeper into something he had thought was already dead, his capacity for betrayal to wound him. 3 years. Every morning she had kissed him goodbye. Every night she had whispered that she loved him. Every touch, every smile, every moment of intimacy, all of it calculated, all of it rehearsed. A performance so flawless that even he, who trusted no one, had begun to believe it was real. He remembered their first meeting at the charity gala, how she had approached him with that radiant smile, how she had laughed at his jokes, touched his arm, looked at him as if he were the only man in the room. He had thought it was fate. He had thought, perhaps, that even someone like him could be loved. It had all been a lie. The tablet screen cracked slightly under the pressure of his grip. Marcus noticed but said nothing. Boss. His voice was careful, measured. What do you want to do with her? Dominic stared through the glass at Serena's unconscious form. The machines beeped. Her chest rose and fell with mechanical assistance. So fragile. So vulnerable. It would take nothing to end her right now, a whispered order, a disconnected tube, a pillow held too long. But death was too easy, too quick, too merciful. Let her live. Marcus blinked. Live? She has more to tell us. Names, plans, Kozlov's network. Dominic's voice was flat, emotionless, the voice of a man making a business decision. She'll talk when she wakes. She'll tell us everything she knows. And after? Dominic finally turned away from the window. His gray eyes were chips of winter ice. After, she watches everything she built turn to ashes. Her reputation, her freedom, her dreams of power. I want her alive to see it all crumble. He walked past Marcus toward the elevator. His mind was already shifting, calculating, planning 3 moves ahead like a chess master preparing for endgame. Kozlov expected him to react with rage, to strike blindly, to expose his vulnerabilities. That was what enemies always expected from a wounded animal. But Dominic was no animal. He would not give Kozlov the satisfaction of a predictable response. Instead, he would gather intelligence, identify every traitor in his organization, map every connection in Kozlov's network, and he would protect the one person who had proven loyal, the small witness whose courage had saved his life. Double the security on the Sullivan woman and her daughter, he ordered without looking back. No one gets near them. No one. Marcus nodded. Consider it done. The elevator doors closed, sealing Dominic inside with his thoughts. The fluorescent light hummed above him. His reflection stared back from the polished metal, hollow-eyed, stone-faced, utterly alone. 3 years, he thought. 3 years I believed the lie. Never again. The black SUV pulled into an underground garage at 3 a.m. Grace held Emma close as they were escorted through a private elevator, rising 40 floors in silence. The men surrounding them spoke only in clipped commands, their faces hard and unreadable. When the doors opened, Grace stepped into a world she had only seen in magazines. The penthouse sprawled before her like a palace suspended in the sky. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed Chicago's glittering skyline in every direction. The furniture was sleek and modern white leather sofas, glass tables, abstract art on walls that seemed to stretch forever. A kitchen larger than her entire apartment gleamed with marble countertops and appliances that looked like they had never been touched. Emma squirmed out of her arms and ran across the polished hardwood floor, her worn sneakers squeaking with each step. "Mommy, look! The TV is bigger than our whole living room." She pressed her small hands against the massive screen, leaving tiny fingerprints on the glass. "And there's a balcony. Can I go outside? Please?" "Not now, baby." Grace's voice was hollow. She stood frozen in the entryway, clutching her purse, the only possession they had been allowed to bring. This was not her world. These were not her people. Everything about this place screamed wealth and power and danger, a golden cage designed to make prisoners feel like guests. One of the security men, younger than the others, with military posture and a face carved from granite, stepped forward. "Mrs. Sullivan, I'm Thomas. I'll be your primary security detail during your stay." Grace laughed bitterly. "My stay? You make it sound like a vacation." Thomas did not react to her tone. "There's food in the refrigerator. Clothes have been provided in the master bedroom, various sizes, until we can get your measurements. The boss wanted to ensure you and your daughter are comfortable." "Comfortable?" Grace turned to face him, exhaustion and fear igniting into sudden anger. "Your boss is a criminal, a murderer, and now my daughter is trapped in his world because she tried to do the right thing." Thomas met her gaze steadily. When he spoke, his voice was surprisingly gentle. "Mrs. Sullivan, I've worked for Dominic Vittorio for 8 years. I've seen him do things that would keep you awake at night." He paused. "But I've also seen his rules. He doesn't hurt women. He doesn't hurt children. Ever. It's the one line he's never crossed. That's supposed to make me feel better?" "No." Thomas glanced toward Emma, who was now exploring the kitchen with wide-eyed wonder. "But you're the mother of the girl who saved his life. In his world, that debt means something. He'll protect you both with everything he has." Grace wanted to argue. She wanted to scream that she didn't need protection from monsters, she needed to be far away from them. But the words died in her throat. She had no money, no connections, no power. If the people who had tried to kill Dominic wanted to find Emma, they would. And Grace could do nothing to stop them. Nothing except the help of the very devil she feared. "Mommy?" Emma appeared at her side, tugging her hand. "Why do you look sad? This place is like a castle." Grace knelt down, brushing a strand of blonde hair from her daughter's face. "I'm just tired, sweetheart. It's been a long night. Are we going to live here now? Just for a little while?" Emma tilted her head, her green eyes thoughtful. "Is the man from the restaurant going to visit? The one in the black suit?" Grace stiffened. "Why do you ask?" "Because he looked sad." Emma's voice was matter-of-fact, the simple observation of a child who saw what adults often missed. "The pretty lady wanted to hurt him. That's really mean. Does he have anyone to take care of him?" Grace had no answer. She thought about her husband, Michael, dead 4 years now, crushed beneath falling scaffolding at a construction site. She remembered the phone call, the hospital, the funeral she could barely afford, the endless nights afterward, working double shifts at the diner and the restaurant, sleeping 5 hours if she was lucky, pouring every ounce of herself into keeping Emma fed and clothed and safe. All those sacrifices, all that struggle, and now her little girl was caught in the crossfire of a war between criminals. Grace pulled Emma into her arms, holding her tight. "Time for bed, baby. But I'm not tired. I know, but Mommy needs you to try." She carried Emma to the master bedroom, an obscenely luxurious space with a bed that could fit 6 people. As she tucked her daughter beneath silk sheets that probably cost more than her monthly rent, Emma reached up and touched her cheek. "Don't be scared, Mommy. The castle man will keep us safe. I can tell." Grace kissed her forehead. "Go to sleep, sweetheart." She stayed until Emma's breathing grew slow and even, then walked to the window and stared out at the city below. Somewhere out there, dangerous men were hunting her daughter, and the only thing standing between Emma and death was a mafia boss with sad eyes and blood on his hands. 2 days passed in the gilded silence of the penthouse. Dominic arrived without warning on the 3rd morning, an old habit born from decades of trusting no one. He had learned long ago that announced visits revealed only what people wanted him to see. The truth lived in unguarded moments. The elevator doors opened directly into the living area. Thomas stood near the balcony doors, straightening immediately when he saw his boss. "Sir, we weren't expecting." Dominic raised a hand, cutting him off. His eyes had already found what they were searching for. On the balcony, bathed in morning sunlight, Emma sat cross-legged on a cushioned chair. Crayons lay scattered around her like fallen leaves. A coloring book rested on her knees, but she was not coloring inside its printed lines. Instead, she was drawing on a blank page, creating something entirely her own. Dominic moved toward the balcony without thinking. Thomas stepped aside, watching with barely concealed curiosity as the most feared man in Chicago approached a 6-year-old girl. The glass door slid open. Emma looked up at the sound, her green eyes catching the light. For a moment, Dominic expected fear, the same terror he had seen in the restaurant, the same instinct to flee. But Emma smiled. "Mister, you came back." The words hit him like a physical blow, so simple, so genuine. No calculation behind them, no hidden agenda. Just a child happy to see someone she barely knew. "Are you feeling okay?" Emma asked, setting down her crayon. "You looked really sick the other night. Mommy said the pretty lady was very mean to you." Dominic stood frozen. When was the last time someone had asked about his well-being? When was the last time anyone had cared whether he was okay? Not because they wanted something, but simply because they cared. He could not remember. Slowly, carefully, he crouched down until his eyes were level with Emma's. The position felt foreign to him, vulnerable, almost childlike. But something about this little girl demanded it. "I'm fine," he said quietly. "Thanks to you." Emma beamed at the praise, then held up her drawing for inspection. "Look, I made this for you." Dominic took the paper carefully, as if it might crumble at his touch. The drawing was crude, the way all children's art was crude stick figures with oversized heads, colors that bled outside the lines. But the subject was unmistakable. A man in a black suit, square shoulders, dark hair, and on his face a smile. "That's you," Emma explained helpfully, pointing at the figure. "But I didn't know how to draw you looking sad, so I made you happy instead. Is that okay?" Dominic stared at the paper. Something in his chest constricted painfully. "Why do you think I'm sad?" Emma tilted her head, considering the question with the grave seriousness only children possessed. "Because your eyes look like Mommy's eyes when she misses Daddy." She picked up a blue crayon and began coloring the sky behind the stick figure. "Daddy went to heaven when I was little. Mommy cries sometimes when she thinks I'm sleeping, but I always hear her." The words pierced through every wall Dominic had built around himself. 20 years of armor, 20 years of carefully constructed indifference, and this child, this tiny, innocent creature, had seen through all of it in seconds. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. "Emma?" Grace's voice cut through the moment. She stood in the doorway, one hand gripping the frame as if she might collapse without its support. Her hair was damp from a shower, her face bare of makeup. She looked younger like this, more fragile, more real. Her eyes moved from Emma to Dominic, and something flickered in their depths, not the fear he expected, but something more complex. Wariness, yes. Uncertainty, but also a question she did not speak aloud. Dominic rose slowly, the drawing still clutched in his hand. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. Grace saw a man kneeling before her daughter, holding a child's artwork like it was made of gold. She saw the crack in his composure, the glimpse of something human beneath the monster's mask. She saw what Emma had seen, sadness so deep it had calcified into stone. Dominic saw a mother who had placed herself between her child and a predator. He saw exhaustion worn like a second skin. He saw strength that bent but did not break, love that demanded nothing in return. He saw someone real, perhaps the first real person he had encountered in years. "She made this for me," he said finally, lifting the drawing. Grace's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "She's been working on it all morning." "Mommy, can the mister stay for lunch?" Emma bounced off her chair, grabbing Dominic's free hand with both of hers. "Please?" Thomas said there's chicken nuggets. Dominic looked down at the small fingers wrapped around his own warm, trusting, fearless. He should say no. He had meetings, operations to oversee, a war to plan. But the word that left his mouth surprised even him. "All right." The news came 3 days after the lunch with chicken nuggets. Marcus burst into Dominic's office without knocking, something he had never done in 15 years of service. His face was pale beneath his permanent tan, his jaw tight with barely contained urgency. "We have a problem." Dominic looked up from the shipping manifests spread across his desk. One glance at Marcus's expression told him everything he needed to know. "Kozlov. He knows." Marcus placed a burner phone on the desk. "Word hit the streets an hour ago. Someone talked, probably the sous chef, before he disappeared. Kozlov knows Serena failed. He knows someone warned you." Marcus paused. "And he's looking for the witness." Dominic's hand stopped mid-motion. The witness. A blonde girl, 6 years old, daughter of a waitress at the Monarch. Marcus's voice hardened. "He's put out a bounty, $500,000 for information leading to her location." The number hung in the air like poison. $500,000. For a child. For Emma. Dominic rose slowly from his chair. His movements were controlled. Deliberate the calm before a hurricane makes landfall. He's targeting a child? Boss, Kozlov doesn't operate by our rules. He never has. Marcus watched his employer carefully. To him, witnesses are witnesses. Age doesn't matter. Something cracked behind Dominic's eyes. In 15 years, Marcus had seen his boss face assassination attempts, betrayals, and wars that left bodies stacked in warehouses. Through all of it, Dominic had remained ice-calculating, emotionless, untouchable. But now, for the first time, Marcus saw the ice begin to fracture. Dominic's fist slammed into the mahogany desk with devastating force. The wood splintered beneath his knuckles, a crack splitting down the center like a lightning bolt. Papers scattered. A glass of water toppled and shattered on the floor. He wants to play dirty? Dominic's voice was quiet, dangerously quiet. Fine. We play dirty. Blood dripped from his torn knuckles, but he did not seem to notice. Double security at the penthouse. No triplet. I want eyes on every entrance, every exit, every shadow. He grabbed his jacket from the chair. And prepare the estate. The one in Lake Forest. No one knows about it outside our inner circle. We're moving them? Tonight. Dominic strode toward the door. I'll tell them myself. The penthouse was quiet when Dominic arrived. Emma was napping in the master bedroom, her small form curled around Mr. Buttons beneath the silk sheets. Thomas stood guard near the hallway, nodding silently as Dominic passed. He found Grace on the balcony, staring out at the city with hollow eyes. She had lost weight in the past few days, stress eating away at her already thin frame. When she heard his footsteps, she turned. Mr. Vittorio. Her voice was flat, resigned. More bad news? Dominic stepped onto the balcony, closing the glass door behind him. The wind whipped between buildings, carrying the distant sounds of traffic from 40 floors below. There's a bounty on Emma's head. Grace's face went white. Her hands gripped the railing so tightly her knuckles turned to bone. What? $500,000. Anyone who provides information about her location. Dominic kept his voice steady, clinical, delivering facts, not emotions. The man behind this is named Victor Kozlov. He's the one who sent Serena. And now that his plan failed, he wants to eliminate the only witness who can connect him to the attempt. Grace shook her head frantically, as if denial could change reality. She's 6 years old. She's just a baby. How can anyone? He doesn't care. Dominic cut her off. Men like Kozlov see only obstacles and opportunities. Your daughter is an obstacle. Tears spilled down Grace's cheeks. You're telling me someone wants to kill my little girl? I'm telling you I won't let that happen. The words came out harder than he intended, sharper, more absolute. Grace looked up at him through her tears, searching his face for something she could trust. Why? Her voice cracked. Why do you care? Emma is nothing to you. We're nothing to you. Just strangers who got caught in your war. Dominic was silent for a long moment. The wind howled around them, tugging at his jacket, ruffling his dark hair. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, almost vulnerable. When was the last time someone saved me without wanting something in return? He met her gaze. Not for money, not for power, not for territory. Grace shook her head slowly. Never. The word fell from his lips like a confession. In 37 years, no one has ever risked anything for me without expecting payment, except your daughter. He stepped closer, and Grace did not retreat. I'm moving you tonight. A private estate outside the city, hidden, secure. Kozlov won't find you there. His gray eyes held hers. I will protect Emma with my life. You have my word. Grace studied him for a long moment, this man of violence and shadow, this monster who ruled the underworld with an iron fist. And for the first time, she saw something else. A boy who had lost everything, a man who had never been saved. Okay, she whispered finally. I trust you. The Lake Forest estate sprawled across 2 acres of manicured grounds, hidden behind stone walls 12 feet high. Security cameras tracked every angle. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter in rotating shifts. Motion sensors lined the property like invisible tripwires. From the outside, it was a fortress. But inside, Dominic had created something else entirely. Grace discovered it on their first morning, the garden bursting with flowers she couldn't name, their colors vivid against the green lawn. A small swimming pool sparkled in the sunlight, its water heated to a perfect temperature. And beyond the main house, tucked beneath an old oak tree, stood a wooden swing set with 2 swings and a small slide. It had not been there before. She was certain of that. Mommy, look. Emma raced across the grass. her laughter echoing through the morning air. "A swing! Can I go? Please, please, please?" Grace watched her daughter climb onto the swing, pumping her legs with fierce determination. The fear that had gripped Emma for days seemed to melt away with each arc through the air. She was just a child again, not a witness, not a target, just a little girl enjoying a swing set. "Mr. Vittorio had it installed overnight," Thomas said from behind her. "Said every kid needs a place to play." Grace said nothing, but something shifted in her chest, a crack in the wall she had built against this world and the man who ruled it. The days began to blur together. Emma adjusted faster than Grace thought possible. Children were resilient that way, able to find joy in the smallest things, to accept new realities without the weight of adult fear. She explored every corner of the estate, named the goldfish in the garden pond, and started lessons with a private tutor who believed she was a visiting niece from out of state. And every day, without fail, Dominic came. At first, he claimed it was for security briefings. He would speak with Thomas and the other guards, review camera footage, check the perimeter protocols, professional, distant, all business. But Grace noticed how his visits grew longer. She noticed how he always found his way to wherever Emma was. The garden, the playroom, the kitchen where the cook let her help make cookies. She noticed how he crouched down to her level when they spoke. How he listened to her rambling stories about imaginary friends and cartoon characters with the same intensity he probably gave to criminal negotiations. She noticed how his voice changed when he talked to Emma. Softer, warmer, almost gentle. One afternoon, Grace found them on the back patio. Emma sat at the wrought iron table, crayons spread before her in a rainbow explosion. Dominic sat across from her, his suit jacket draped over the chair back, his sleeves rolled to his elbows. He was watching Emma draw with an expression Grace had never seen on his face. Peace. He looked at peace. "And this is the garden," Emma explained, pointing to her paper. "See the flowers? And that's the pool. And that's Thomas. I made him really tall because he's a giant." "Very accurate," Dominic said solemnly. And this Emma held up the paper with both hands, presenting it like a treasure. "This is my favorite one." Grace moved closer to see, her breath caught in her throat. 3 figures stood in the center of the page. A woman with yellow hair, a small girl with a big smile, and a man in a black suit, holding the little girl's hand. Above them, in Emma's wobbly handwriting, "My family. That's you, Mommy." Emma pointed to each figure in turn. "And that's me. And that's Mr. Dominic. Because he takes care of us now. Like Daddy used to." The silence stretched like a held breath. Grace stepped forward instinctively. "Emma, sweetie, that's not what we should talk about, it's beautiful." Dominic's voice stopped her mid-sentence. He took the drawing from Emma's hands with a gentleness that seemed impossible for someone built of such violence. "I'll hang it in my office," he said quietly, "so I can see it every day." Emma beamed. "Really? You promise?" "I promise." That night, alone in his penthouse across the city, Dominic sat in his leather chair and stared at the drawing pinned to his desk lamp. The crayon colors seemed too bright for his world of shadows. The smiling figures seemed too innocent for a man with blood on his hands. "My family." The misspelled word blurred before his eyes. When was the last time he had belonged to something? When was the last time anyone had wanted him to belong? This wasn't the plan. He had spent 20 years building walls so high that nothing could reach him. Power, control, isolation, safety and solitude. But now a 6-year-old girl had drawn him into her family portrait, and her mother looked at him without fear. And he found himself counting the hours until he could return to that fortress in Lake Forest, not for security briefings, but for something far more dangerous. Hope. "This shouldn't be happening," he whispered to the empty room. But it was. The call came at midnight. Serena Castellano had opened her eyes. Dominic arrived at Chicago Memorial Hospital an hour later, moving through sterile corridors like a shadow. The guards at her door stepped aside without question. No one asked where he was going or why. In this city, certain men did not answer to anyone. He paused outside room 412, his hand resting on the cold metal handle. Through the narrow window, he could see her propped against pillows, tubes still snaking from her arms, her face gaunt and hollow beneath the fluorescent lights. The woman who had shared his bed for 3 years. The woman who had tried to murder him. Dominic pushed open the door and stepped inside. The machines beeped their steady rhythm. The ventilator hissed. Serena's eyes, once so bright with calculated charm, now flickered with something far more primal. Fear. Neither spoke for a full minute. The silence stretched between them like a wire pulled taut, ready to snap. Dominic stood at the foot of her bed, hands clasped behind his back, his face carved from stone. Serena watched him with the desperate alertness of prey cornered by a predator. Finally, she broke. Are you going to kill me? Her voice was hoarse, ravaged by the tube that had been down her throat. Gone was the honeyed sweetness, the musical laughter, the practiced seduction. All that remained was a broken woman clinging to survival. Dominic tilted his head slightly. Death would be too easy for you. Serena let out a laugh, bitter, hollow, edged with hysteria. Then what do you want? Revenge? Torture? I'm already in hell, Dominic. Every breath feels like swallowing glass. Good. The single word landed like a slap. Serena flinched. Dominic moved closer, pulling a chair from the corner and positioning it beside her bed. He sat down slowly, deliberately, the way a judge might settle into his bench before delivering a verdict. I want the truth. All of it. Every detail, every name, every plan. His voice was quiet but absolute. And you will tell me, Serena, because you want to live. She stared at him for a long moment, calculations flickering behind her sunken eyes. Then her shoulders sagged, the final surrender of a woman who had lost everything. It was Victor's idea from the beginning. Her words came slowly, each one pulled from somewhere deep. 3 years ago, at that charity gala where we met, he sent me to you, told me to get close, gain your trust, learn your weaknesses, and the end game? Your death. Serena's gaze dropped to her hands, thin, pale, trembling against the hospital sheets. After you were gone, Victor would absorb your territory. I would receive 30% of the operation as payment. Properties, distribution networks, a seat at the table. Dominic absorbed this without visible reaction. 3 years. Every moment was calculated. Every moment. The confirmation should have hurt. Perhaps it did. Somewhere beneath the layers of ice he had wrapped around himself. But Dominic had long ago learned to separate pain from purpose. What else? Serena hesitated. Her tongue darted across cracked lips. Victor has someone inside your organization. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. Someone close to you, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know who. He never told me. But every move you made, every decision, Victor knew about it almost immediately. He has eyes inside your inner circle, Dominic. Someone you trust. Dominic's expression did not change. Not a single muscle moved. But beneath the surface, earthquakes shifted and cracked. Someone close. Someone he trusted. Marcus, his right hand for 15 years. The man who knew every secret, every plan. Thomas, the guard protecting Emma and Grace at this very moment. Vincent, the accountant who managed every dollar in his empire. Leo, the soldier who commanded his men in battle. One of them was feeding information to Kozlov. One of them was a traitor. I'm telling the truth, Serena said, her voice rising with desperation. I don't know who it is. Victor kept that separate from me. He said it was insurance that if I failed, he would still have access. Dominic rose from the chair. If what you've told me is accurate, you'll live. Prison, but alive. Under my protection, where Kozlov can't reach you. He straightened his jacket, smoothing invisible wrinkles. If you've lied to me, and if I have? Dominic turned toward the door. His hand closed around the handle. He did not answer. The door slammed shut behind him, the sound echoing through the sterile corridor like a gunshot. Serena stared at the ceiling, tears leaking from the corners of her eyes, her broken body trembling beneath the thin hospital blanket. She had told him everything she knew. She could only pray it was enough. The trap was elegantly simple. Dominic sat alone in his office the following night, crafting 4 different lies. Each one contained the same core information, a new safe house location for the high-value witnesses currently under his protection. But the addresses were different. The timing was different. The details were unique to each recipient. Marcus received coordinates for an abandoned warehouse in Cicero. Thomas was told about a farmhouse in downstate Illinois. Vincent learned of an apartment complex in Oak Park. Leo got directions to a lakeside cabin in Wisconsin. 4 lies. 4 trusted men. 1 traitor. Dominic delivered each piece of information personally, watching their faces for any flicker of guilt or hesitation. Marcus accepted the briefing with his usual stoic professionalism. Thomas nodded and asked clarifying questions about security protocols. Vincent jotted notes in his leather ledger. Leo cracked his knuckles and asked when they were moving. None of them flinched. None of them betrayed a single sign of deception, which meant one of them was very, very good at hiding. That night, sleep refused to come. Dominic lay in his penthouse bedroom, staring at the ceiling while shadows crawled across the walls. His mind churned through possibilities like a machine grinding metal. If Marcus was the traitor, then 15 years of loyalty meant nothing. Every secret Dominic had shared, every vulnerable moment, every strategic decision, all of it compromised. his entire empire built on a foundation of lies. If Thomas was the traitor, then Emma and Grace were in immediate danger. The man standing guard outside their door could be the very person waiting to open it for their enemies. The thought made Dominic's blood run cold. He threw off the covers and dressed in the darkness. 30 minutes later, his car pulled through the gates of the Lake Forest estate. The guards nodded as he passed, accustomed now to his unexpected visits. The house was quiet at 2 a.m. Shadows pooled in corners. Moonlight spilled through tall windows, painting silver rectangles on the hardwood floors. Dominic moved through the darkness with practiced silence, checking rooms, testing locks, assuring himself that everything was secure. He found Grace in the living room. She sat curled in an armchair near the cold fireplace, a book open in her lap, a small lamp casting a warm circle of light around her. She looked up when he entered, surprise flickering across her features, before settling into something calmer. "You don't sleep either," she observed quietly. "Neither do you." Grace closed her book, some paperback romance with a faded cover, probably borrowed from the estate's small library. Emma had a nightmare. Took an hour to get her back down. Dominic lowered himself onto the sofa across from her. The leather creaked beneath his weight. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence was not uncomfortable, simply heavy with unspoken things. "Can I ask you something?" Dominic's voice was quieter than usual, stripped of its commanding edge. Grace nodded. "Have you ever trusted the wrong person?" She considered the question, her fingers tracing the spine of her book. "My husband, Michael. I trusted that he would always come home." A sad smile ghosted across her lips. He promised he would be careful on the job site. He promised nothing would happen, and he broke that promise. He died. Grace's voice was steady, but Dominic could hear the old wound beneath the words. A scaffolding collapse. They said it was instant, that he didn't suffer. But I suppose death is still a kind of leaving, isn't it? Even when it's not a choice. Dominic stared at the empty fireplace. The ashes of some long-ago fire still dusted the grate. "My mother was killed when I was 17. Grace went very still. She trusted a man she thought was her friend, a business partner of my father's. Dominic's jaw tightened. He came to our house one night. She let him in because she believed he was there to help. He shot her in the kitchen while I hid in the closet. The words fell into the silence like stones into deep water. Grace did not gasp or offer hollow condolences. She simply listened, truly listened, in a way that Dominic could not remember anyone doing before. "I've never told anyone that," he said finally. "The official story is different, cleaner." "Why tell me?" Dominic looked at her, then really looked. Past the exhaustion and the fear and the circumstances that had thrown them together. He saw a woman who had lost everything and kept going. A mother who would die for her child without hesitation. A soul that had been broken but refused to stay shattered. "Because you understand," he said simply, "what it means to lose someone who was supposed to stay." Grace held his gaze for a long moment. Then she rose from her chair and crossed the room to sit beside him on the sofa, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her body, but not quite touching. "Find your traitor," she said quietly, "and make sure he can never hurt anyone again." Dominic nodded. Outside, the first gray light of dawn began to creep across the horizon. The results came in exactly 48 hours later. Marcus reported first. His warehouse in Cicero remained untouched. No surveillance, no movement, no sign that Kozlov's people had taken the bait. The location was clean. Thomas's farmhouse showed the same. Local contacts confirmed no unusual activity, no unfamiliar vehicles, no Russian accents asking questions in nearby towns. Leo's cabin in Wisconsin sat empty and undisturbed, snow settling on its roof without a single footprint to mar the white blanket. But Oak Park was different. 6 hours after Vincent received his information, 3 black SUVs rolled into the neighborhood. Kozlov's men, identified by their tattoos and their arrogance, spent 2 hours circling the apartment complex, photographing entrances, counting windows, preparing for an assault that would never come. Because the apartment was empty, had always been empty. Just another piece of cheese in Dominic's trap. The traitor was Vincent. Dominic received the news in silence. He sat behind his desk for a long time after Marcus finished the report, his fingers steepled beneath his chin, his gray eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the walls of his office. Vincent, the last person he would have suspected. The old accountant had served the Vittorio family for 25 years, since before Dominic's father died, since before Dominic himself rose to power. He had managed the books through wars and truces, through prosperity and famine. He knew every dollar that flowed through the organization, every secret hidden in numbered accounts, and he had sold it all to Viktor Kozlov. At midnight, Vincent was summoned to the office. He arrived looking smaller than Dominic remembered, a gray-haired man in his 50s with stooped shoulders and watery eyes, wearing the same brown cardigan he had worn for decades. He smelled of coffee and old paper. He looked like someone's grandfather. He looked terrified. "Sit down, Uncle Vincent." Dominic gestured to the chair across from his desk. The word uncle was an old habit, a term of respect from childhood, when Vincent had bounced young Dominic on his knee and snuck him candies behind his mother's back. Vincent sat. His hands trembled in his lap. 25 years. Dominic's voice was soft, almost gentle. "You've served this family for 25 years. You knew my father. You knew my mother. You watched me grow up." Vincent's chin quivered. "Dominic, please, so tell me, Uncle." Dominic leaned forward slowly. "Why?" The old man crumbled like wet paper. "My son." Tears spilled down his weathered cheeks. "Danny, he got into trouble. Gambling debts. $2 million to Kozlov's people. They were going to kill him, Dominic. They sent me pictures, his fingers. His voice broke into sobs. I didn't have a choice. They said if I gave them information, they would forgive the debt. They would let Danny live." Vincent raised his head, his eyes red and desperate. "I never meant to hurt anyone. I swear on my life, I never knew about the child. If I had known, but you didn't ask." Dominic's voice cut through the excuses like a blade. "You didn't ask what they planned to do with the information. You didn't ask who might die because of your betrayal." Vincent had no answer, only tears. Dominic rose from his chair and walked to the window. The city sprawled below him, his city, his empire, his kingdom built on blood and loyalty, and one of the men he had trusted most had tried to burn it all down. If Kozlov's plan had succeeded, Dominic said quietly, I would be dead, and so would a 6-year-old girl who had done nothing wrong except tell the truth. Vincent let out a choked sound. "I didn't know. God forgive me, I didn't know. God might forgive you." Dominic turned to face him. "I won't." The old man's face went white. "But you'll live. Because of those 25 years. Because you held me at my mother's funeral when I couldn't stand on my own." Dominic's jaw tightened. "Your son will work for me until I decide his debt is paid. Every job I give him, no matter how dangerous, he will accept. That is his punishment." Vincent nodded frantically. Yes, anything." "And you," Dominic's voice dropped to a whisper, "you leave Chicago tonight. You never return. If I see your face again, Uncle Vincent, I will forget the man who gave me candy when I was 5. I will remember only the traitor who tried to destroy everything I built. He did not finish the threat. He did not need to." Vincent stumbled out of the office, broken and weeping, a ghost of the man he had once been. Within the hour, word reached Dominic that Kozlov had discovered the trap. The Russian boss had raged through his headquarters, smashing furniture and threatening his men. His prize, the child witness who could connect him to attempted murder, had slipped through his fingers. By morning, a message had spread through the underworld, whispered in back rooms and dark alleys from one end of Chicago to the other. Kozlov's message was simple. Vittorio has chosen war. He will have it. The attack came 2 weeks later, at 3 a.m, when the world was at its darkest. Dominic was already at the estate that night, a decision made on instinct rather than logic. He had told only Marcus, claiming he wanted to review the perimeter security personally, but the truth was simpler and more dangerous. He could not sleep without knowing Emma and Grace were safe. He could not breathe properly when he was too far away, so he had come, and that decision saved their lives. The first sign of trouble was silence. The guards who patrolled the outer wall stopped checking in. Their radios went dead, one by one, like candles being snuffed in a wind. The security cameras flickered and died. Someone had hacked the system, cutting the eyes that watched over the estate. Dominic was on his feet before the first gunshot cracked the night. He moved through the darkness with lethal precision, his pistol already drawn, his senses heightened to razor sharpness. Through the window, he saw shadows swarming over the walls, 12 figures in black tactical gear, approaching from 3 directions, weapons raised. Kozlov's men. The outer guards never stood a chance. They were dead before they could raise the alarm, their bodies crumpling silently onto the manicured lawn. Upstairs, Thomas heard the gunfire and reacted instantly. He burst through the door of Emma's room, finding Grace already awake, clutching her daughter against her chest. Emma was crying soft, terrified sobs muffled against her mother's shoulder. "Follow me, now." Thomas's voice was steel wrapped in calm. He grabbed Grace's arm and pulled them into the hallway. Safe room, basement, move. They ran. Behind them, the sound of breaking glass echoed through the house. Shouts in Russian. heavy boots on marble floors. The estate had become a battlefield. Dominic intercepted them at the top of the stairs. He emerged from the shadows like a phantom gun raised, eyes burning with cold fury. Grace gasped at the sight of him, but there was no time for questions. This way, he took point, leading them down a back staircase that the attackers had not yet reached. 3 men appeared at the bottom of the stairs, their weapons swinging upward. Dominic fired 3 times. 3 bodies fell. They kept moving. The safe room was hidden behind a false wall in the basement, a reinforced steel chamber designed to withstand anything short of a direct missile strike. Dominic punched in the code, and the heavy door swung open. Inside, both of you. Grace hesitated, looking back at him. What about you? I'll hold them here. Dominic, go. She went. Thomas took position beside Dominic as the door sealed shut behind the girls. For a moment, the 2 men stood in silence, listening to the chaos above them, gunfire, explosions, the screams of dying men. How many? Thomas asked. 12. Maybe more. Bad odds. I've had worse. The basement door exploded inward. What followed was a symphony of violence. Dominic and Thomas moved as one, covering angles, conserving ammunition, turning the narrow corridor into a kill zone. Bodies piled at the entrance, blood pooled on the concrete floor. Then Marcus arrived with reinforcements. The battle shifted. Kozlov's men, caught between 2 forces, began to fall. One by one, they were cut down until only desperate stragglers remained. But one got through. He came from nowhere, a shadow that had hidden among the bodies, playing dead until the moment was right. He rose behind Dominic with his gun aimed not at the Mafia boss, but at the safe room door. At Emma, Dominic saw it happen in slow motion. The gun rising, the finger tightening on the trigger, the muzzle flash that would end everything. He threw himself into the bullet's path. The impact spun him around, fire exploding through his left shoulder. He hit the ground hard, his vision blurring, his gun slipping from nerveless fingers. Thomas's shot came a heartbeat later. The attacker's head snapped back, and he collapsed in a heap. Silence fell over the basement like a shroud. Boss! Marcus was at his side instantly, pressing his hands against the wound. Stay with me. Stay with me. Dominic heard the safe room door opening, heard Grace's scream, heard small footsteps running toward him. Then Emma's face appeared above him, tear-streaked, terrified, beautiful in its innocence. You're bleeding. Her voice was barely a whisper. Her small hand reached toward his wound, then stopped, hovering in the air. You got hurt because of me. Dominic tried to speak, but the words came out wrong, slurred by pain and blood loss. Worth it, he managed. Emma began to cry. Around them, the battle was over. 12 of Kozlov's men lay dead or captured. 3 of Dominic's guards had given their lives. The estate was secure, but as medics rushed in, and hands lifted him onto a stretcher, Dominic kept his eyes fixed on the little girl who had started all of this, the child who had saved his life with a whispered warning, and for whom he had just taken a bullet without a moment's hesitation. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was Emma's face, and he realized, with something like wonder, that he would do it again, 1,000 times over. The private physician arrived within the hour. Dr. Reeves had served the Vittorio family for 2 decades, asking no questions and leaving no records. He worked on Dominic in the master bedroom while Marcus stood guard at the door, his face carved from granite, his eyes betraying nothing of the fear that had gripped him when he saw his boss go down. The bullet had passed cleanly through Dominic's shoulder, missing the artery by centimeters, shattering no bone. Lucky, the doctor said. Incredibly lucky. Dominic did not feel lucky. He felt the burn of torn flesh, and the deeper ache of knowing how close he had come to leaving Emma and Grace unprotected. Grace assisted the doctor with steady hands, passing instruments and holding gauze against the wound while Dr. Reeves stitched. Her face was pale but composed, her movements precise despite the slight tremor in her fingers. Emma refused to leave. She sat, curled at the foot of the bed, her small body pressed against Dominic's leg, her fingers wrapped around his uninjured hand. Tears still streaked her cheeks, but she had stopped crying. Now she simply held on, as if letting go might cause him to disappear. You can't die, she whispered when the doctor finally stepped back. You promised to hang my picture in your office. You can't break a promise. Dominic looked at her through a haze of pain and exhaustion. This child, this tiny, fierce, impossibly brave child, had wormed her way past every defense he had ever built. I promise, he said softly. I won't die. The words felt strange on his tongue. He had not made a promise to anyone since his mother, since he had sworn to her bleeding body that he would survive, that he would become strong enough that no one could ever hurt him again. 20 years of silence. And now a 6-year-old had broken it. Emma's grip on his hand tightened. Cross your heart? Despite everything, the pain, the blood, the war raging around them, Dominic almost smiled. Cross my heart. The doctor left sedatives and antibiotics, instructions for wound care, warnings about infection and rest that everyone knew Dominic would ignore. Grace walked him to the door, thanking him quietly, then returned to the bedroom. Emma had finally fallen asleep, exhausted by fear and tears. She lay curled against Dominic's side like a kitten seeking warmth, her breathing slow and even. Grace stood in the doorway, watching them. She wouldn't let go, Dominic said quietly, even when I tried to make her leave during the stitches. She loves you. Grace crossed the room and sank into the chair beside his bed. God help us all, but she does. Silence settled between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. The clock on the wall ticked steadily. Outside, guards patrolled the damaged estate, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. You took a bullet for her. Grace's voice was barely above a whisper. You threw yourself in front of a gun for my daughter. You would have done the same. I'm her mother. That's different. She looked at him with something raw in her eyes. You didn't have to. You could have let Thomas handle it. You could have stayed behind cover. But you didn't. Dominic had no answer. The truth was too complicated, too tangled with emotions he did not fully understand and could not begin to articulate. Grace reached out, almost unconsciously, and took his hand. The touch was gentle, tentative, the brush of her fingers against his bruised knuckles. She seemed to realize what she had done a moment later, her cheeks flushing, her hand starting to withdraw. Dominic caught it, held it firmly. Don't. One word, a command and a plea wrapped together. Grace stared at their intertwined fingers. Then, slowly, she relaxed. Her hand remained in his. They sat like that until dawn broke over the horizon, two people bound by circumstance, drawn together by danger, connected by something neither was ready to name. No words were needed, no explanations required. Just presence, just warmth, just the simple human comfort of not being alone. When the first rays of sunlight crept through the curtains, Dominic spoke. I have to end this. Grace looked up. Kozlov will keep coming. He'll send more men, find new ways to reach Emma. As long as he's alive, you'll never be safe. Dominic's jaw tightened. This is my war. I will finish it. When? 48 hours. Grace absorbed this in silence. Then she squeezed his hand once firmly, deliberately. Come back to us. It was not a request. It was not a prayer. It was a command. The assault began at midnight. Kozlov's nightclub occupied a converted warehouse in Chicago's industrial district, 4 stories of concrete and steel, surrounded by empty lots and abandoned factories. Tonight, the building pulsed with music and light. Luxury cars lined the street. Inside, the Russian boss was hosting his partners, celebrating deals made in blood. He had no idea death was coming. Dominic stood in the shadows across the street, his left arm still bandaged beneath his tactical vest. The wound throbbed with every heartbeat, but pain was irrelevant now. Pain was just another weapon, fuel for the fire burning in his chest. 30 men waited behind him, 30 loyal soldiers who had answered his call without hesitation, against Kozlov's 50. The odds were not in their favor. But Dominic had something Kozlov lacked: information extracted from the captured gunmen, detailing every entrance, every guard rotation, every weakness in the fortress. Remember, Dominic said quietly, his breath misting in the cold air. Kozlov is mine. Marcus nodded beside him. Understood, boss. They moved. The first guards fell silently, throats cut, bodies dragged into darkness before anyone noticed their absence. Team 2 breached the back entrance, while Team 3 cut the power to the security systems. By the time the first alarm sounded, Dominic's men were already inside. Chaos erupted. Gunfire tore through the nightclub, shattering bottles and mirrors, scattering screaming guests in every direction. Kozlov's soldiers scrambled for weapons, but surprise had stolen their advantage. They fell in clusters, unprepared for the violence that swept through their sanctuary. Dominic moved through the carnage like a ghost. His pistol barked death with mechanical precision. 1 target, 2, 3, each shot placed with the cold efficiency of a man who had been killing since before he could legally drink. Marcus covered his flank, their movements synchronized by years of partnership. The stairs to the VIP level were guarded by 6 men. They lasted 8 seconds. At the top, a reinforced door blocked the way. Dominic nodded to Marcus, who placed a breaching charge against the lock. The explosion ripped the door from its hinges. Beyond lay Kozlov's private sanctuary. The Russian sat behind a massive desk, a glass of vodka in one hand, a pistol in the other. He was larger than Dominic remembered, 45 years old, broad as a bear, with a scar that split his face from forehead to jaw. Vittorio. Kozlov's voice was calm, almost amused. Finally come to die properly? You targeted a child. Dominic stepped into the room, his gun trained on Kozlov's chest. A 6-year-old girl. Witnesses are witnesses. Kozlov shrugged. Age is irrelevant. Not to me. They fired simultaneously. Both missed Kozlov's shot, grazing Dominic's wounded shoulder, Dominic's bullet shattering the vodka glass. Then the guns were empty, and the real fight began. Kozlov moved faster than a man his size should. He crossed the distance in 2 strides, a knife appearing in his hand. Dominic blocked the first slash with his forearm, feeling the blade bite through fabric and flesh. Pain exploded through his body. His shoulder screamed in protest. But then he saw Emma's face, heard her voice. You promised. Rage ignited. Dominic caught Kozlov's wrist, twisted, and drove his knee into the Russian's stomach. The knife clattered to the floor. Fists replaced steel, brutal, savage blows that split skin and cracked bone. They fought like animals. Kozlov landed a punch that sent stars exploding across Dominic's vision. Dominic responded with an elbow that shattered the Russian's nose. Blood sprayed across the expensive carpet. Finally, Dominic found his opening. He drove Kozlov backward, clamming him against the desk, then wrapped his hands around the Russian's throat, squeezed, watched the life begin to fade from those cruel eyes. Kill me, Kozlov gasped, blood bubbling on his lips. Finish it. Dominic's fingers tightened. It would be so easy, so satisfying. But Emma's face appeared again. Innocent, trusting, pure. He released his grip. Kozlov collapsed, coughing and choking, staring up with confusion in his dying eyes. Death is too easy for you. Dominic stepped back, reaching for his phone. You'll live. In prison, watching everything you built crumble to dust. Sirens wailed in the distance, police officers loyal to Dominic, arriving on schedule. Within the hour, Viktor Kozlov was in custody. Charges of racketeering, murder, attempted assassination, and conspiracy to harm a minor would ensure he never saw freedom again. The war was over, and Dominic had kept his promise. 3 months had passed since the night Kozlov fell. The Russian boss now sat in a federal prison cell, serving a life sentence without possibility of parole. The evidence against him had been overwhelming testimony from captured soldiers, financial records exposing decades of criminal enterprise, and the damning confession of Serena Castellano, who had traded everything she knew for a reduced sentence of 15 years. Dominic's empire emerged from the war stronger than ever. Rivals who had watched from the shadows now understood the price of crossing him. Allies who had wavered renewed their loyalty with fervent dedication. The east side of Chicago belonged to him completely, not through fear alone, but through the grudging respect of those who had witnessed him fight for something beyond power. But the greatest change had nothing to do with territory or influence. It lived in the Lake Forest estate, in the sound of a little girl's laughter echoing through sun-filled rooms. Grace and Emma had never left. What began as protection had transformed into something far more permanent. The fortress was no longer a safe house. It was simply home. Emma attended the finest private school in the city, driven each morning by Thomas, who had become less of a bodyguard and more of a beloved uncle. Grace no longer worked double shifts at restaurants. Instead, she had begun taking culinary classes, nurturing a dream of opening her own bakery, a dream Dominic had already promised to fund. Their relationship had grown slowly, carefully, 2 wounded people learning to trust again. There were dinners together, the 3 of them around the kitchen table like any ordinary family. There were late-night conversations after Emma fell asleep, when Grace and Dominic would sit on the patio and share pieces of themselves they had never shown anyone else. There were accidental touches that became intentional, glances that lingered longer than necessary, and one evening, as autumn painted the garden in shades of gold and crimson, there was a kiss. It happened on the back porch, with the sunset bleeding across the sky. Grace had been laughing at something Dominic said, a rare joke, awkwardly delivered when suddenly the laughter faded and something deeper took its place. He had leaned toward her slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. She did not pull away. The kiss was gentle, tentative, a question and an answer wrapped together, a promise of things to come. But it was Emma who delivered the moment that shattered Dominic completely. She found him in his study one Saturday morning, working through reports he no longer cared about. She stood in the doorway, clutching a piece of paper, another drawing, no doubt her green eyes unusually serious. "Can I ask you something important?" Dominic set down his pen. "Of course." Emma walked slowly into the room, her bare feet padding softly on the carpet. She stopped in front of his desk, worrying her lower lip the way she always did when she was nervous. "Can I call you Daddy?" The words hit him like a physical blow. Dominic stared at her, unable to speak. 20 years of walls, 20 years of armor, 20 years of convincing himself that he needed no one, and no one could ever need him. All of it crumbled before a 6-year-old girl in pink pajamas. "You don't have to," he managed finally, his voice rough. "If you don't want, but I want to." Emma tilted her head, confused by his hesitation. "You take care of me like Daddy used to. You make Mommy smile. You read me stories and check for monster food under my bed." She paused. "That's what daddies do, right?" Dominic rose from his chair and walked around the desk. Slowly, he knelt down until his eyes were level with hers the way he always did, the way he had done since the first moment they met. "Then yes," he said quietly, "you can call me Daddy." Emma's face split into the brightest smile he had ever seen. She threw her arms around his neck and held on tight. "I love you, Daddy." The words broke something inside him, something that had been frozen for 20 years. Tears burned in his eyes. He wrapped his arms around her small body and held her as if she were the most precious thing in the universe, because she was. At the doorway, Grace watched, with tears streaming down her face. She did not interrupt. Some moments were too sacred for words. That night, after Emma had fallen asleep and the house had grown quiet, Dominic stood alone at his bedroom window, staring out at the stars. For 20 years, he thought, I built an empire with fear and blood. I believed power was the only protection. I believed love was weakness. But then a 6-year-old girl saved my life with nothing but courage and honesty. And I learned the truth. Family is not something you are born into. It is something you build through choice, through sacrifice, through love you never knew you were still capable of feeling. He looked down at the drawing Emma had given him that morning. 3 stick figures holding hands beneath a yellow sun, a misspelled word at the top. My family. For the first time in 20 years, Dominic Vittorio smiled a real smile, full and unguarded. He was finally home. Dear friends, thank you for staying with us until the very end of this story. This tale reminds us of something profound, that light can emerge from the darkest places, and salvation often comes from the most unexpected sources. A powerful mafia boss, hardened by decades of violence and betrayal, found his redemption through the innocent courage of a 6-year-old child. It teaches us that family is not defined by blood, but by the love we choose to give and receive. In our own lives, we may encounter moments when a small act of kindness, a word of truth, a gesture of compassion, can change everything. Never underestimate the power of doing what is right, even when you are afraid. We would love to hear from you. How did this story touch your heart? Have you ever experienced a moment when someone unexpected changed your life? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one, and your stories inspire us to create more content that speaks to the soul. If this video moved you, please give us a like, share it with someone who needs to hear this message, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss our daily stories. We wish you good health, abundant joy, and peace in your heart every single day. Thank you for watching. Goodbye, and we will see you in the next video.